Mayong buntag natong tanan mga igsoon. Once again, dinhita sa itong programa sa Heavenly Lifestyle Evangelism Ministry. Bago lang napaabot nato ang mensahe sa kabahin sa sukaranan sa maayong panglawas. Kinahanglan ato yuning hatagag pagtagad ang mao nga mensahe nga maoy end time message. Last message of warning, which is all about the third angel's message, coupled with the right arm, nga mao ang itawag na to nga health reform message. No? Kay atong mahibalan igsoon nga the health reform message is for our salvation and the salvation of the world. Musugot ang salili igsoon, kadtong mga kaigsuonan nato nga mga kalabuton man na, wa man ay labot sa kaluwasan. I would like to tell you, direct from the writings, from the pen of inspiration, the health reform message is for our salvation and the salvation of the world. So klaro kayo sa mga presentation sa akong wife, ug unsa ka importante igsoon ang pakigdugtong sa Dios uban ni ini nga mga hanay sa mga kamatuoran nga mao ang naghatag natog hanay nga niya natakaron sa last message of mercy nga mao ang three angels' messages. Unya, dili ni siya makasulod. Ang entering words, ani nga mensahe igsoon, makasulod ni sa mga panimalay through medical missionary work or health reform message. And there is only one art of healing that heaven approves o waylain ang 8 principles of health. Nutrition, ang atong pagkaon, atong ginabag-uhon. Otherwise, our frontal lobe will greatly be affected sa atong pagpatuyang sa kaon. No? So, naan ang nutrition, naan ang exercise, naan ang water, naan ang sunlight, naan ang temperance, pagpugong, naan ang air, naan ang rest, pagpahulay, unya ang trust in divine power. So naining atong programa karon nga ako mong abi-abihon o timbayahon tanan, i-welcome mo na ko sa atong program sa pagpadayon sa mao nga mga mensahe. We will be talking about why was sin permitted. Kitaghan man nato igsoon. Magsigit ang pangutan nga di man di gusto malaglag ang Ginoo, di man di gusto nga malaglag ang tao, nganong gitugutan man ning sala. Ato nang hisgutan karon, nganong gitugot ang sala sa pagsulod, pagdagsa sa kalibutan. Ha? O, as what I have said, I would like to welcome everyone, no? And I would like to inform you nga kining ato ang ministry igsoon. It is a self-supporting ministry. No? Unya kay self-supporting ministry man ni. Kinahanglan ni sa inyuhang mga pag-ampo, kinahanglan ni sa inyuhang mga financial support if you have any. Pero dili na pinirsahay. Ang naay kasing-kasing lang, ug pipila pod ang naga-respond ni anak nga panginahanglan. So, welcome everyone. Og sa pagsugod ini, I would like to ask everyone to kneel with me as we seek the Lord in prayer. Ginoo nga mahigugmaon og dalaygon, dalangpanan nga Dios, niining takna sa kabuntagon, maghisgot na sabmi og importante kayong topic, kabahin sa amoang pagsabot sa imong disenyo sa matag usa ka namo niining kalibutan. O pasalamat mi nga makahisgot mi karon kabahin ining nganong gitugot man nimo ang pagsulod sa sala ining kalibutan. Amo nang tun-an o palihog hatagi lang mi sa lantip nga panghuna-una aron among masabtan pod ang buot ipasabot ni ining tanan. Salamat kaayo sa imong pagtubag. Madawat na mo ang among gihangyo sa ngalan ug gahom ni Ginoong Hesus. Amen. Mga kaigsunan, wala tay lain nga definition sa sala. Ug ato nang mabasa igsoon sa 1 John chapter 3 verses 4 to 6. 1 John chapter 3 verses 4 to 6. Ingon pa niya, everyone, nagbasa ko igsoon sa New International Version, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. O ato ta sa King James Version, sin is the transgression of the law. Ang paglapas sa kasuguan, igsoon, maunay sala. Wa nay lain pang definition sa sala. Basta mulapas ganita sa kasuguan, bisag unsa diha, basta sugo sa Dios. Naglapas sa sala, yun na siya. Munang ingon sa James chapter 2 verse 10, whosoever shall keep the whole law and offend in one point, you are guilty of all. Sala, igsoon. Iyaw ninyo na. Kunya kita usay wa nakasabot pa. Ini nga punto sa ato ang pagkakristohanon. If we offend in one point, whosoever shall keep the whole law and offend in one point, he is guilty of all. So, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. Ang iyang giingon diri nga ang sala kuno, lawlessness. Pagbungkag sa kasuguan or sa balaod. But you know that He appeared so that He might take away our sins. Na? And in Him is no sin. No one who lives in Him keeps on sinning. No one who continues to sin has either seen Him or known Him. So, ang paghawas ra gyud sa sala sa atong kaugalingon is mahimo natong abyan ang Dios si Ginoong Hesus. Diha mahimo kang putli at tubangan sa amahan. If you abide, muna ingon niya, if I am the vine, ye are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. So once igsuon nga isurrender na to ang iyatong kinatibuk ang pagkatao ngadto sa Dios, dili na ta magsigig pagpakasala. So karon atong mahibalan, pagdaga na to sa Romans 3 verse 23, the wages of sin is death. Ipasidanan na ta sa Ginoo nga ang kabayaran sa sala kamatayon. So why was sin permitted? Ngano man gyud nga gitugot ni sala igsoon? God is love. Ingon pa niya. So 1 John chapter 4 verse 16. His nature, His law is love. If it ever has been, it ever will be. The high and lofty one that inhabited eternity, whose ways are everlasting, changeth not. With Him is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. In Isaiah chapter 57 verse 15, and Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 6, and James chapter 1 verse 17. Every manifestation of creative power is an expression of infinite love. Tanan kuno nga gipadayag nga gahom sa paghimo sa Dios. Maunay pagpadayag po, pag-express man sa iyang gugma nga walay katapusan. The sovereignty of God involves fullness of blessing to all created beings. Gani ingon ang Psalm chapter 89 verses 13 to 18 sa Revised Version. Strong is thy hand and high is thy right hand. Righteousness and judgment are the foundation of thy throne. Mercy and truth go before thy face. Blessed is the people that know the joyful sound. They walk, O Lord, in the light of thy countenance. In thy name do they rejoice all the day, and in thy righteousness are they exalted. For thou art the glory of their strength, for our shield belongeth unto Jehovah, and our King to the Holy One. So mga kaigsunan, the history of the great conflict between good and evil, ang istorya kuno igsoon sa gapadayon nga pakigbisog taliwala sa maayo ug sa dautan, from the time it first began in heaven to the final overthrow of rebellion and the total eradication of sin, is also a demonstration of God's unchanging love. Ipadayag sa Ginoo ang iyang gugmangan ni kanato. Why was it permitted? Because God would like to demonstrate His infinite love to us. Sa unsa nga pamaagi ato nang masabtan igsoon. The sovereign of the universe was not alone in His work of beneficence. He had an associate, a co-worker who could appreciate His purposes and could share His joy in giving happiness to created beings. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Lisod kayo i-define ang pagka-Diyos sa Ginoo igsoon. Pero daghan na ito gusto yun mutugkad ba? Misteryo muna siya. Na gusto mo explain nga God is one, but He exists in three personalities. Unya naman po yung mga statements nga, there are three great powers in heaven. So, the same was in the beginning with God in John chapter 1 verses 1 and 2. Christ the Word, the only begotten of God, was one with the eternal Father, one in nature, in character, in purpose, the only being that could enter into all the counsels and purposes of God. One with the Father. Ang Word, exo, who is Jesus Christ. His name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, in Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6. Diyaw ni mo nang, si Ginoong Jesus, imo pong tawgon nga Everlasting Father. Iso gaya na ni mo i-define. Kunya, moingon siya nga na, I and my Father are one. Na? How could we dissect? Kita nga mga makasasala nga tao, unsaon nato na pag-dissect nga pulong sa Ginoo. Nganong ato man gyud nang tugkaron? His goings forth have been of old, from everlasting, in Micah chapter 5 verse 2. And the Son of God declares concerning Himself, the Lord possessed me in the beginning of His way, before His works of old. I was set up from everlasting. When He appointed the foundations of the earth, then I was by Him, as one brought up with Him, and I was daily His delight, rejoicing always before Him. Mabasa na ito na sa Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 to 30. The Father wrought by His Son in the creation of all heavenly beings. By Him were all things created, whether they be thrones or dominions, or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. Angels are God's ministers, radiant with the light ever flowing from his presence and speeding on rapid wing to execute his will. But the Son, the anointed of God, the express image of his person, the brightness of his glory, upholding all things by the word of his power, holds supremacy over them all. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. A glorious high throne from the beginning was the place of his sanctuary. In Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 12. A scepter of righteousness, the scepter of his kingdom. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 8. Honor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. In Psalm chapter 96, verse 6. Mercy and truth go before his face. In Psalm 89, verse 14. So, the law of love, being the foundation of the government of God, the happiness of all intelligent beings, depends upon their perfect accord with its great principles of righteousness. God desires from all his creatures the service of love. Maupunay iyahang ginapangayo nato nga iyang mga linalang ang pagserbisyo sa gugma. Igsoon. Service that springs from an appreciation of his character. Tiyaw ninyo na og unsa kanindot ang disenyo sa Dios. Nga kita muhatag putag mga binuhatan uban sa gugma sama sa iyang pagpadayag nato sa iyang infinite. Walay sinugdanan, walay katapusan nga gugma. Igso. He takes no pleasure in a forced obedience. Mao na gihatagan ta niya karon o pagpili, freedom of choice. And to all he grants freedom of will, that they may render him voluntary service. Katagan ka kung sa gusto nimo nga dili ka mahimong paulipon ba? Gihatagan ka niya pagpili, igsoon. So long as all created beings acknowledge the allegiance of love, there was perfect harmony throughout the universe of God. Na, kung naakunutani anang gugma igso, naagyo ng panaghiusa sa tibuok kalibutan. It was the joy of the heavenly host to fulfill the purpose of their Creator. They delighted in reflecting his glory and showing forth his praise. And while love to God was supreme, love for one another was confiding and unselfish. So para nako nindot kayo igso, nga gitugot ang sala sa pag-abot dinhi ni ining kalibutan nga akong gipuy-an karon, kay gusto di ay sa Ginoo nga mga lagad ko niya ug akong i-exercise ay iyang gihatag na akong kapasidad sa paghigugma sa akong isig katawo ug labaw sa tanan ngadto kaniya. And while love to God was supreme, love for one another was confiding and unselfish. There was no note of discord to mar the celestial harmonies, but a change came over this happy state. There was one who perverted the freedom that God had granted to his creatures. Grabe ang Ginoo. Nga taliwala ni ining tanan. Naagyod sa gipahaluna nga mga pamaagi aron ikaw ug ako mahimo gyud kang kabahin sa langit nung kinaiya. Lucifer, son of the morning, was first of the covering cherub, holy and undefiled. He stood in the presence of the great Creator, and the ceaseless beams of glory, enshrouding the eternal God, rested upon him. Thus saith the Lord God, thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Grabe, perting wapuhag yun si Lucifer ba? Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. Muna ingon sa Ezekiel chapter 28 verses 12 to 15. Muna description ni Lucifer. Siguro pinakagwapo ni. Unya hinimo radiation siya sa Ginoo. He was created by God. Pero atong may balaan karon og unsay nahitabo ni Lucifer. Little by little, Lucifer came to indulge the desire for self-exaltation. Mo nila way lang may igsoon di ay. Og maambungan ra punta kaayo ba. Muhandom na dayon tag kadang pagtuboy gyud sa atong kaugalingon. Og maadunahan na ta. Ang pagtuboy gyud sa atong kaugalingon mao dayoy atong mauna-unaan. The scripture says, thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Igun anak ba tayong soon? Kay gwapo, mapahitas ko na takaayo. Na, moingon man po ng uban. Na, gani dihay batig naong hambugiro, gani na siya kayo. Nasamot na ko, nga gwapo. No? Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. In Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 17. Thou hast said in thine heart, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Tiyaw ni mo na, iyahan ng lagpasan o mahimo, ang naghimo po niya. Ang naglalang niya, iyan ang ubertikan igsoon. I will be like the Most High. In Isaiah chapter 14 verses 13 and 14. Though all his glory was from God, this mighty angel came to regard it as pertaining to himself. Not content with his position, though honored above the heavenly host, he ventured to covet homage due alone to the Creator. Mao mo na, munang muingon dahil ng uban nga, abi kay naka-plastar diha o posisyon, mura na pog nakatungtong sa kabaw. No? Na yung mga sinultihan ngayon anak, nga maplastar na ganita, murang nalimot na rin tag-asa tagikan ba? Daghan kayo nagkahitabuan na igsoon. Di na takahinumdum ba? Sa mga tao nga mao'y nagpauswag na to. Ug mahimo yatakan na put gani ito, natuto sila. Mauna, kinaiya di na sa yawa igsoon. Nang ingon ana nga batasa. Ato kuno tan-aw ng atong kaugalingon og ingon ata bata or dili bata ingon ana. Ha? Instead of seeking to make God supreme in the affections and allegiance of all created beings, it was his endeavor to secure their service and loyalty to himself. Gawas nga, nabugiro siya, nadalo pa yun si Lucifer. Unya, sobra pa yun sa dalo, nahakog pa yun siya. Kaya ang dalo, kuno igsoon, unsay imo-imo, unsay ako-ako, ang hakog, unsay ako-ako, unsay imo-ako, maunay kinaiya sa yawa. And coveting the glory with which the infinite Father had invested his Son, this prince of angels aspired to power that was the prerogative of Christ alone. Now the perfect harmony of heaven was broken. Nagguba. Ang harmonya nga nag-exist sa langit. Lucifer's disposition to serve himself instead of his Creator aroused a feeling of apprehension when observed by those who considered that the glory of God should be supreme. In heavenly council, the angels pleaded with Lucifer, the Son of God, presented before him the greatness, the goodness, and the justice of the Creator, and the sacred unchanging nature of his law. Yaw na niya dito pa sa langit, igsoon, dili o wala yun mausob ang kasuguan sa Dios, ang iyang balaod. God Himself had established the order of heaven, and in departing from it, Lucifer would dishonor his maker and bring ruin upon himself. But the warning given in infinite love and mercy only aroused a spirit of resistance. Lucifer allowed his jealousy of Christ to prevail and became the more determined. Yayo siyang tambag igsoon. Isamot na noon siya. Hasta pa ang iyang kasilag sa Dios. Nisamot pod igsoon. Unsa ba? Naa siya pagka hambugiro, tungod kay adunahan siguro siya, gwapo siya, unya, naa niya ang kasilag sa Ginoo. Naa niya ang pagkadalo. Diyaw ninyo na, ug unsay klase nga batasan niya ng ingon ana igsoon. To dispute the supremacy of the Son of God, thus impeaching the wisdom and love of the Creator, had become the purpose of this Prince of Angels. To this object, he was about to bend the energies of that mastermind, which, next to Christ's, was first among the hosts of God. But he who would have the will of all his creatures free, left none unguarded to the bewildering sophistry by which rebellion would seek to justify itself. Before the great contest should open, all were to have a clear presentation of His will, whose wisdom and goodness were the spring of all their joy. So ingon anak kamahigugmaon ang Ginoo igsoon. Diyaw ninyo nang niya'y binuhat lang niya o niya gusto na nga mo labaw pa niya. Maorasab na sa atong mga kinaiya karon, gikan ta sa abog, karon ang mga misteryo sa Dios gusto pa natong kutkuton kaluton aron ta makahibalo ug unsa gyud ang katinuoran ining tanan. Nga ingon gi tambaga na kita sa Ginoo nga katong gipadayag maura to atong tun-an ug kanang mga gitago ay na ninyo hikotari pa sa pag daisikta. Grabe, igsoon. Sa ato pa kinidi ay atong kinaiya igsoon. Makaingon ko ba sa personal na. Kinidi ay atong kinaiya nga sige bitaw tagkutkot anang mga misteryo sa Ginoo. Liwat yun ta siyawa. Natay pagkadalo. Natay pagkasiluso. Grabe. Danag o klaro kaayo tataw igsoon ang kinaiya sa tao nga ingon ni ana tungod kay nahimo bang pattern after sa kinaiya siyawa. The King of the universe summoned the heavenly hosts before him, that in their presence he might set forth the true position of his Son and show the relation he sustained to all created beings. The Son of God shared the Father's throne and the glory of the eternal, self-existent one encircled both. About the throne gathered the holy angels, a vast and numbered throng, 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. Nga mabasa nato sa Revelation chapter 5, verse 11. The most exalted angels as ministers and subjects, rejoicing in the light that fell upon them from the presence of the deity. Before the assembled inhabitants of heaven, the king declared that none but Christ, the only begotten of God, could fully enter into his purposes. And to him it was committed to execute the mighty counsels of his will. So si Ginoong Jesus na ay designation igsoon. Nga gitugot sa amahan. The Son of God had wrought the Father's will in the creation of all the hosts of heaven, and to him, as well as to God, their homage and allegiance were due. Christ was still to exercise divine power in the creation of the earth and its inhabitants. But in all this, He would not seek power or exaltation for himself, contrary to God's plan, but would exalt the Father's glory and execute his purposes of beneficence and love. Iyaw ninyo na. Dili na ni mo ma-explain igsoon. Bisang pag-unsaon ni mo. So the angels joyfully acknowledge the supremacy of Christ and prostrating themselves before him, poured out their love and adoration. Lucifer bowed with them, but in his heart there was a strange, fierce conflict. Grabe yun yung sinahan. No? Grabe yun yung hakog. Diba? Truth, justice, and loyalty were struggling against envy and jealousy. Usmuna, truth, justice, and loyalty were struggling against envy and jealousy. The influence of the holy angels seemed for a time to carry him with them, as songs of praise ascended in melodious strains, swelled by thousands of glad voices. The spirit of evil seemed vanquished, and a terrible love thrilled his entire being. His soul went out in harmony with the sinless worshippers, in love to the Father and the Son. But again, he was filled with pride in his own glory, my friends. Puno siya sa garbo tungod sa iyahang himaya. His desire for supremacy returned, and envy of Christ was once more indulged. Mausap na ang kinaiya ni Judas, igsoon. Naabay mga gapahipi nga mga motibo ba? The high honors conferred upon Lucifer were not appreciated as God's special gift, and therefore called forth no gratitude to his Creator. He gloried in his brightness and exaltation and aspired to be equal with God. He was beloved and reverenced by the heavenly host. Angels delighted to execute his commands, and he was clothed with wisdom and glory above them all. Pinaka dibuy na si Lucifer sa tanang anghel. Siya pa'y choir director. Siya pa'y pinakagwapo. Tanan nga adjectives imong mahatag niya. Pero ang kaproblema karon kay nitubo sa iyang kaugalingon nga ang himaya sa Dios ba iya bang tupngan, iya pagani palamon. He was beloved and reverenced by the heavenly host. Yet the Son of God was exalted above him as one in power and authority with the Father. He shared the Father's counsels, while Lucifer did not thus enter into the purposes of God. Why? Questioned this mighty angel. Should Christ have the supremacy? Why is he honored above Lucifer? Nganong ingon ani man? Ngutan na siya. Nganong wa man siya ko'y apil ang mga sekreto nila diha nga meeting-meetingan. Ginasabot-sabotan. Pila na ang iyang salaigson. Ni-apil na po ang pagka-ambisyoso. Maora gihapon na sa atong kahimtang karon. Kani atong pag-ambisyon, atong pagka-ambisyoso, murisulta di ay nagarbo igsoon. Murisulta nagpagkahakog. No? Yawan-on nga kinaiya igsoon. Leaving his place in the immediate presence of the Father, Lucifer went forth to diffuse the spirit of discontent among the angels. He worked with mysterious secrecy and for a time concealed his real purpose under an appearance of reverence for God. Nagpakaaron ingno na po. Nagsunod-sunod na ba? Ang usa kuno kasala will lead another sin. Mauna na. Mura nag-chain of reaction. He began to insinuate doubts concerning the laws that governed heavenly beings, intimating that though laws might be necessary for the inhabitants of the world's angels, being more exalted, needed no such restraint, for their own wisdom was of sufficient guide. Nadili na po magpabadlong. Pagkagrabe nga kinaiya iksong. Mao gihapon na sa atong kapanahonan karon. Di na gani ta magpabadlong kay iuna gyud nato ang atong mga gana. Ug asa ta nahaluna karon nga naata sa atong comfort zone, di na ta mutuo sa Dios. Kinaiya di ay na ngayawan-on igsoon. They were not beings that could bring dishonor to God. All their thoughts were holy. It was no more possible for them than for God himself to err. The exaltation of the Son of God as equal with the Father was represented as an injustice to Lucifer, who, it was claimed, was also entitled to reverence and honor. If this prince of angels could but attain to his true exalted position, great good would accrue to the entire host of heaven. Di ba ni kinaiya ni Judas igsoon? O dili ako ani mo'y magdala aning mga disipulos, dili ako mo'y manager, walay mahitabo ani nila. Yawan-on gihapon. For it was his object to secure freedom for all. But now, even the liberty which they had hitherto enjoyed was at an end. For an absolute ruler had been appointed them, and to his authority all must pay homage. Such were the subtle deceptions that through the wiles of Lucifer were fast obtaining in the heavenly courts. There had been no change in the position or authority of Christ. Lucifer's envy and misrepresentation and his claims to equality with Christ had made necessary a statement of the true position of the Son of God. But this had been the same from the beginning. Many of the angels were, however, blinded by Lucifer's deception. Maura gihapon karon sa atong kahimtang ginabutaan ta sa yawa sa iyang mga pagpahisalaag ug paglingla nato. Kahibalo ang yawa ug unsay weakness nato igsoon, ug ikaw imong kaluyahon ang bahandi ay stilan natagan kag ubay-ubay nga kwarta nga malingaw yung gagmayo ba hangtod nga makalimot na ka sa Dios. Ug imong kaluyahon ang kaalam ay himuong kag intelihente kaayo hangtod nga bright pa kaayo nga mahimo gyud kag unsay imong posisyon. Pastilan, taking advantage of the loving, loyal trust reposed in him by the holy beings under his command, he had so artfully instilled into their minds his own distrust and discontent that his agency was not discerned. Lucifer had presented the purposes of God in a false light, misconstruing and distorting them to excite dissent and disaffection, dissatisfaction, my friends. Na, gidaot na niya ang Ginoo. Maor kaya po na aron. Aron nga mutaas ang atong posisyon, daoto na ito ng atong isigataw. Naabay gugma diha. He cunningly drew his errors on to give utterance to their feelings. Then these expressions were repeated by him when it would serve his purpose as evidence that the angels were not fully in harmony with the government of God. While claiming for himself perfect loyalty to God, he urged that changes in the order and laws of heaven were necessary for the stability of the divine government. Na usbon naman niya ang kasuguan sa Ginoo. Thus, while working to excite opposition to the law of God and to instill his own discontent into the minds of the angels under him, he was ostensibly seeking to remove dissatisfaction and to reconcile disaffected angels to the order of heaven, while secretly fomenting discord and rebellion. He, with consummate craft, sa may atong mabasa diya sa Daniel, craft, word nga craft, igsoon, caused it to appear as his sole purpose to promote loyalty and to preserve harmony and peace. Increase ang gitawag na itong craft. Meaning to say, igsoon nga, ginapauswag ang mga pribiliyo nato. Nga atong tanaw nga, uy, ni arman di ay ni. Hangtod nga ato na lang dayong hatagang gamayng pagtagad ang mga langit nung tambang. Unya di ay naigko na tasalaang igsoon. The spirit of dissatisfaction thus kindled was doing its baleful work. While there was no open outbreak, division of feeling imperceptibly grew up among the angels. There were some who looked with favor upon Lucifer's insinuations against the government of God. Although they had heretofore been in perfect harmony with the order which God had established, they were now discontented and unhappy because they could not penetrate his unsearchable counsels. They were dissatisfied with God's purpose in exalting Christ. Tiyaw ni mo na unsa ka. Maayo kaayo mo lingla o mo pahisalaag ang yawa igsoon. Nadalaga ni ang mga balaan na nga manulunda, how much more kita? O dili ta magsigig pakigsuod sa Dios. Una-una, ang mga manununda nga created beings sa Ginoo pod, nga katudili to sila gikan sa abog. Madala gani sa mga pagpahisalaag ni Lucifer nga yawa. How much more sa atong panahon karon? Mao nang giingon ni Ginoong Hesus, itambag niya. Nga kinahanglan sa atong kaugalingon, naagyo na kanunay ang atong pakigdugtong kaniya. Kay diha lang kaniya, ingo pa niya, I will provide a way of escape. I have 1,000 ways to provide a way of escape. Ining tanan nga hanay sa mga pagpahisalaag sa yawa. While there was no open outbreak, division of feeling imperceptibly grew among the angels. There were some who looked with favor upon Lucifer's insinuations against the government of God. Although they had henceforth heretofore been in perfect harmony with the order which God has established, they were now discontented and unhappy because they could not penetrate his unsearchable counsels. They could not penetrate his unsearchable counsels. Perti ka bright si Lucifer, igsoon. Nga bisan ang mga manununda, dili katugkad. Ug ilag yung sabtan ug maayo ang iyang mga tambag nga pahisalaan. How much more sa ato karon igsoon? This stood ready to second Lucifer's demand for equal authority with the Son of God. But angels who were loyal and true maintained the wisdom and justice of the divine decree and endeavored to reconcile this affected being to the will of God. Christ was the Son of God. He had been one with him before the angels were called into existence. He had ever stood at the right hand of the Father. His supremacy, so full of blessing to all who came under its benignant control, had not heretofore been questioned. The harmony of heaven had never been interrupted. Wherefore should there now be discord? The loyal angels could see only terrible consequences from this dissension, and with earnest entreaty they counseled the disaffected ones to renounce their purpose and prove themselves loyal to God by fidelity to His government. Naamang dili madala sa iyang mga hulhog igsoon. Kaya nga naman, because they were loyal to God. Kamusta man nato? Nagtuo kag dili ka dani sa yawa o wa kay loyalty sa Ginoo. Unya sa may test of loyalty sa Ginoo sa nato karon nga mga katawhan. The Sabbath is a test of loyalty. pastilan sa ato pa og di ta kabarog ug unsaon nato pagbalaan ang adlaw ipapahulay the seventh day Sabbath, then sayang igsuon ang atong pagpangalaga. Pariha ra ta sa mga balaan nato nga mga manulunda nga dadala sa mga hulhog ni Lucifer. In great mercy, according to God's divine character, He bore long with Lucifer. Pala na siya sa Ginoo. Pero tungod kay God is long-suffering. Panid-an lang si Lucifer. Ug naaba na niyang tinguha pod ug handom nga mahibalik siya sa counsel sa Ginoo. The spirit of discontent and disaffection had never before been known in heaven. It was a new element, strange, mysterious, and unaccountable. Lucifer himself had not at first been acquainted with the real nature of his feelings. For a time he had feared to express the workings and imaginings of his mind. Yet he did not dismiss them. Maunang karon igsuon sa atong kapanahunan, kanang sige natong pagkutkot sa mga misteryong langit nun, ato na nang undangon ug mahimo. Kay og dili nato na undangon, padulong gyud tas kanaglagan sama sa kinabuhi ni Lucifer nga wa gyud niya giwagtang sa iyang kaugalingon ang handom niya og tinguha sa pagtuboy sa iyang kaugalingon. He did not see whither he was drifting. Kita nakita ba nato nga nagkahisalaag na ta? Wala. But such efforts as infinite love and wisdom only could devise were made to convince him of his error. His disaffection was proved to be without cause, and he was made to see what would be the result of persisting in revolt. Lucifer was convinced that he was in the wrong. He saw that the Lord is righteous in all his ways and holy in all his works, in Psalm chapter 145, verse 17, that the divine statutes are just, and that he ought to acknowledge them as such before all heaven. Maini si Lucifer igsoon, kay nakasabot siya, nga padulong na yun siya sa pagrebelde o pagpagkasala. Pero pareho ni Judas, wala yun na niya gihawas sa iyang mga tinguha. Kita, pangutana karon, nasayon bata nga ining mga sukwahi nga doktrina nga atong dawat or paabot, nakasabot bata o nangasayop ta ini? Or basig pareho ta atong lost coin nga nawala siya, nga wala na yun siya kay balo, o nawala ba siya? Kaya abin ninyo mga kaigsuunan, no? Wala na ilain. There is only one way nga magiyahan ka paingon sa langit. The way that leads to God is the only way that will lead us to heaven. So, natay mga doktrina nga sukwahi, igsuon. Kaya siguro, gusto nato nga mahimo tang original ini nga bahin sa atong pagpangalaga. Unya parihara yun igsoon sa kahimtang ni Lucifer. Daghang mga example sa Biblia igsoon ana. Though he had left his position as covering cherub, yet if he had been willing to return to God, acknowledging the Creator's wisdom and satisfied to fill the place appointed him in God's great plan, he would have been reinstated in his office. Tiyaw ninyo na og unsa ka considerate ang Ginoo. Og ni idlalang unta siya nga nakasala siya, ibalik siya sa iyang posisyon. The time had come for a final decision. He must fully yield to the divine sovereignty or place himself in open rebellion. He nearly reached the decision to return, but pride forbade him. Kani manggunggarbo igsoon. Ako nagud ni mao man ay problema. Gabisan gani sa atong kahimtang ang atong pag sunod sa mga pahimangno sa Dios, bisan lang sa country living igsoon. Di gani ta ka biya sa atong mga comfort zone. Kay mahadlok man tayo igsoon nga, uy, naunsa naman is kuan ron nga, hayahay man ni kaayo sa una, maayo man kayo ito iyang trabaho, unya karutuan naman sa kabukiran. Dili ba na yawan-on nga kinaiya? The time had come for a final decision. He must fully yield to the divine sovereignty or place himself in open rebellion. He nearly reached the decision to return, but pride forbade him. Agkoy kaluoy. It was too great a sacrifice for one who had been so highly honored to confess that he had been error. Mauna diha. It would be a great sacrifice for you and me nga kita na ilhan nata sa atong kaharuhay. Unya, atong hanay ang atong kaugalingon sa mga pahimangno sa Dios nga mulevel na ta sa mga simpleng pagkinabuhi. Mauna igsuon kinaiya ni Lucifer that his imaginings were false and to yield to the authority which he had been working to prove unjust. Although naana na yung handom, ako gusto na ko mag-country living, pero mag-unsa man ko dito sa bukid, nga maayo man kaay ko sa ako ang kahimtang karon. Hayahay man kayo nga akong kinabuhi, unsay akong gusto na amad. A compassionate creator, in yearning pity for Lucifer and his followers, was seeking to draw them back from the abyss of ruin into which they were about to plunge. But his mercy was misinterpreted. Lucifer pointed to the long-suffering of God as an evidence of his own superiority. Imbis gipakitaan siya, maora gihapon sa atong kahimtang karon. Nagihatagan taglugway sa kinabuhi, aron unta mas pasiguli tagbalik sa Ginoo. Pero igsoon, ato manoong gihimo nga kay Dios mangud siya mo ra ingon ana ang ginahimo. Luciferian gihapon ta igsoon. Lucifer pointed to the long suffering of God as an evidence of his own superiority, an indication that the king of the universe would not accede to his terms. If the angels would stand firmly with him, he declared, they could yet gain all that they desired. He persistently defended his own course and fully committed himself to the great controversy against his maker. Thus it was that Lucifer, the light bearer, the sharer of God's glory, the attendant of his throne, by transgression became Satan. So igsoon, og ang atong kinaiya pattern after Lucifer, siyempre, we are of our father, the devil. Yawan on rayon gihapon ta. The adversary of God and holy beings and the destroyer of those whom heaven had committed to his guidance and guardianship. Rejecting with disdain the arguments and entreaties of the loyal angels, he denounced them as deluded slaves. Grabe. Ang kaayo sa imong isig katao, aron lang yun, ikaw mapasiguli sa Ginoo, imo naman ang himuon nga babag sa pagpadayon sa imong garbo igsoon. Tiyaw ni mo na unsa na klase nga kinaiya. The preference shown to Christ, he declared an act of injustice both to himself and to all the heavenly host, and announced that he would no longer submit to this invasion of his rights and theirs. He would never again acknowledge the supremacy of Christ. He had determined to claim the honor which should have been given him and take command of all who would become his followers. And he promised those who would enter his ranks a new and better government under which all would enjoy freedom. Great numbers of the angels signified their purpose to accept him as their leader. Perting daghana yun. Ang nahisalaag ng mga manulunda. Flattered by the favor with which his advances were received, he hoped to win all the angels to his side, to become equal with God himself, and to be obeyed by the entire host of heaven. Still, the loyal angels urged him and his sympathizers to submit to God, and they set before them the inevitable result should they refuse. He who had created them could overthrow their power and signally punish the rebellious daily. No angel could successfully oppose the law of God, which was as sacred as himself. They warned all to close their ears against Lucifer's deceptive reasoning and urged him and his followers to seek the presence of God without delay and confess the error of questioning His wisdom and authority. Maurag yun ay angay na itong mahimo, igsoon. Ato yung ibalik ang atong gugma sa Diyos. Many were disposed to heed this counsel, to repent of their disaffection and seek to be again received into favor with the Father and His Son. But Lucifer had another deception ready. Grabe! Ang yawa igso. The mighty revolter now declared that the angels who had united with him had gone too far to return, that he was acquainted with the divine law and knew that God would not forgive. He declared that all who should submit to the authority of heaven would be stripped of their honor, degraded from their position. For himself, he was determined never again to acknowledge the authority of Christ. The only course remaining for him and his followers, he said, was to assert their liberty and gain by force the rights which had not been willingly accorded to them. Nangita pa yun silang lain ng mga kagawasan. So, grabe nga kinaiya. So far as Satan himself was concerned, it was true that he had now gone too far for return. Iya mapuhadlokon ang mga manununda nga ni sabay sa iya nga di na mo pwede diha makabalik sa Ginoo. Hibal-an mo. Og ihulog mo din sa yuta, ihulog na mo sa langit. Mauna yawanon nga kinaiya igsuon. Tiyaw ninyo na, nakuha ninyo ang punto diri igsuon. So far as Satan himself was concerned, it was true that he had now gone too far to return. But not so with those who had been blinded by his deceptions. So kanang mga tao nagsulti ninyo igsuon, kung kinsa man na sila nga, ihulog mo din ihulog po mo sa langit. Mga lingla o pahisalaag na ninyo. Nga di ay kung kita sa atong baruganan karon, magmaminatud unta o maghinulsunta sa atong mga sala, pinalangka kong higala. Anda mo dawat ang Ginoo sa matag usa tungod kay naapa ang abli pa ang ganghaan sa kaluwasan. Okay? To them, the counsel and entreaties of the loyal angels opened a door of hope. And had they heeded the warning, they might have broken away from the snare of Satan. But pride, love for their leader, and the desire for unrestricted freedom were permitted to bear sway, and the pleadings of divine love and mercy were finally rejected. Applicable gihapon na sa atong kahimtang karon. Kasi mauni Mr. So-and-so. Kinahanglan ato ning ikonsulta niya. Love for their leader. Ang atong garbo isuod. God permitted Satan to carry forward his work until the spirit of disaffection ripened into active revolt. It was necessary for his plans to be fully developed, that their true nature and tendency might be seen by all. Maunang na ay probation igsoon. Gihatagan si Lucifer sa tanan niyang diskarte aron madayan, mahimong klaro sa tanan na nag-obserbar sa iyang mga pamaagi igsoon. Lucifer, as the anointed cherub, had been highly exalted. He was greatly loved by the heavenly beings, and his influence over them was strong. God's government included not only the inhabitants of heaven, but all the worlds that he had created. And Lucifer had concluded that if he could carry the angels of heaven with him in rebellion, he could carry also all the worlds. Maunay iyahan na pong lingla. Maog kitang tanan, mga manulunda, madalanin ako, ang tibuok, universo, naghihimos Ginoo, ang mga katawhan niya, iya pong madala sa maong lingla. He had artfully presented his side of the question, employing sophistry and fraud to secure his objects. His power to deceive was very great. Ang iyang gahom sa pagpahisalaag, very great. By disgusting himself in a cloak of falsehood, he had gained an advantage. All his acts were so clothed with mystery that it was difficult to disclose to the angels the true nature of his work. Until fully developed, it could not be made to appear the evil thing it was. His disaffection would not be seen to be a rebellion. Even the loyal angels could not fully discern his character or see to it, or see to what his work was leading. Grabe yun na plano yung son. Pertigong bright si Lucifer. Lucifer had at first so conducted his temptations that he himself stood and committed. The angels, whom he could not bring fully to his side, he accused of indifference to the interests of heavenly beings. Akusaran na niya itong dili niya madala ng mga manulunda. Maorag hapon na karon. Ang katong magreforma, isong akusahan na sa waga reforma. The very work which he himself was doing, he charged upon the loyal angels. Ipangpahid na ni Lucifer. Ang iyang mga binuhatan nga sukwahi sa kabubuton sa Dios, iyan ang ipangpahid. Di ba na maugyapon karon ang kadaghan? So, pastila, no? It was his policy to perplex with subtle arguments concerning the purposes of God. Everything that was simple, he shrouded in mystery, and by artful perversion cast doubt upon the plainest statements of Jehovah. And his high position, so closely connected with the divine government, gave greater force to his representations. So mga kaigsunan, gamay na lang, pero nindot kayo ng atong topic. Why was sin permitted? No? God could employ only such means as were consistent with truth and righteousness. Satan could use what God could not. Flattery and deceit. Pangatik-atik ba? Huwap-huwap ng mga mensahe ba? Uban sa paglingla o pagpahisala. Yawan-un nga kinaiya ikson. He had sought to falsify the word of God and had misrepresented his plan of government, claiming that God was not just in imposing laws upon the angels, that in requiring submission and obedience from his creatures, he was seeking merely the exaltation of himself. Na ang Ginoo naman iyang pahira noon. Nga, gusto yun nga maoy matuboy sa tanan. Siyempre, Ginoo ko to. Naalay proseso, naalay mga pamaagi ang Diyos, naalay kasuguan ang Diyos, nga angay masunod igsoon. Ingon ana ka-organize ang panggoberno sa gingharian sa atong labawang magkagagaw. He was seeking merely the exaltation of himself. It was therefore necessary to demonstrate before the inhabitants of heaven and of all the worlds that God's government is just. His law perfect. Satan had made it appear that he himself was seeking to promote the good of the universe. The true character of the usurper and his real object must be understood by all. He must have time to manifest himself by his wicked works. Mauna ang gihatagan siya kahigayunan. Hatagan siya probation sa Ginoo. Ug unsag iyang diskarte aron masabtan sa kadaghanan ug sa tibuok mga linalang sa Dios. Maora gihapon na nato karon igsoon. The discord which his own course had caused in heaven, Satan charged upon the government of God. Na? Ipangpahid na niya ang iya mga sayop sa Diyos. All evil he declared to be the result of the divine administration. All evil he declared to be the result of the divine administration. Tanan nga kadautan igsoon. Iyan ang gipahid sa Ginoo. He claimed that it was his own object to improve upon the statutes of Jehovah. Therefore, God permitted him to demonstrate the nature of his claims, to show the working out of his proposed changes in the divine law. His own work must condemn him. Satan had claimed from the first that he was not in rebellion. The whole universe must see the deceiver and mask. Naituyo sa Ginoo. Kaya man yung ipakita nga wala siya mo rebuilde. Pero, yatagan siya gigayon. Aron masabtan, hasta sa atong kapanahunan karon. Ug unsa kadako nga sayop ang yawanon nga mga pamaagi ug gidladlad na ni Lucifer nga ug ato gani nang iaplikar sa atong kaugalingon karon yawanon sabta igsoon. Even when he was cast out of heaven, infinite wisdom did not destroy Satan. Tiyaw ninyo, since only the service of love can be acceptable to God, the allegiance of his creatures must rest upon a conviction of his justice and benevolence. Justice and benevolence. Muna'y gusto ipasabot sa Ginoo nimo nako ug natong tanan. The inhabitants of heaven and of the worlds, being unprepared to comprehend the nature or consequences of sin, could not then have seen the justice of God in the destruction of Satan. Na? Iyaw ninyo na igsoon. Kung iya patong papas, gipatay niya si Lucifer, ang hustisya igsoon sa Dios dili maka-explain og unsay sayop sa yawa. Had he been immediately blotted out of existence, some would have served God from fear rather than from love. Padlok na. Asa kita karon. Magkurog na sa pagpangalagad sa Ginoo. The influence of the deceiver would not have been fully destroyed, nor would the spirit of rebellion have been utterly eradicated. For the good of the entire universe, through ceaseless ages, he must more fully develop his principles, that his charges against a divine government might be seen in their true light by all created beings, and that the justice and mercy of God and the immutability of his law might be forever placed beyond all question. Unsa ko no? Gitugos sa Ginoo. Bisang paghihulog na siya sa langit, butang sa kalibutan. Gipakita sa Dios gihapon ang iyang gugma nga sa mga katawhan kanato karon. Ang kombinasyon sa iyang hustisya, sa iyang kaluoy, o sa walay pag-usab nga kasubuan. Hangtod yun na sa walay katapusan igsoon. O dili yun ta maka-question ni Ana. Satan's rebellion was to be a lesson to the universe through all coming ages. A perpetual testimony to the nature of sin and its terrible results. The working out of Satan's rule, its effects upon both men and angels, would show what must be the fruit of setting aside the divine authority. Na? Gisampulan na ta sa yawa o unsay mahitabo kung kita mupadayon gyud ta sa atong mga daandan nga sukwahi sa kabubuton sa Dios. dapat igsoon tanan nga mga doktrina nga dili subay haom sa estandarting langit nun, ato na nangihikling, kwaon na nato ng garbo, igsoon. Kwaon na nato ng atong pagpangambisyon nga mo unsa ba ang atong kinabuhi. Ug dili nato na ihatag ang mga comfort zones. Ang pinaka-importante sa ato karon, mentras able pa hanggang haan sa kaluwasan ng igsoon, make ourselves right with God. We have to pray and be converted, my friends. It would testify that with the existence of God's government is bound up the well-being of all the creatures He has made. Thus, the history of this terrible experiment of rebellion was to be a perpetual safeguard to all holy beings, to prevent them from being deceived as to the nature of transgression, to save them from committing sin and suffering its penalty. Maorasan na sa tuwa igsoon. He that ruleth in the heavens is the one who sees the end from the beginning, the one before whom the mysteries of the past and the future are alike outspread, and who, beyond the womb and darkness and ruin that sin has wrought, beholds the accomplishment of His own purposes of love and blessing. Though clouds and darkness are round about Him, righteousness and judgment are the foundations of His throne. Tiyaw ninyo, ang pagkamataro o ang panghukom, maunay pundasyon sa trono sa Diyos. Mabasa na ito na sa Psalm chapter 97 verse 2 sa Revised Version. And this is the inhabitants of the universe, both loyal and disloyal, will one day understand. His word is perfect, for all His ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is He. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 4. So di na natapos igsoon ang atong minsay. Why was sin permitted igsoon? So ang akong paglaom, ang akong pagampo, nga atong masabta na karon, nasabta na nato karon. O nga nung nadagsa ang sala. O gitugot sa Dios nga ang sala mubutho ini kalibutan. So mga pinalangga kong higala, ang pinaka-importante ra diay sa usa nato. Ato yung ipaubos ang atong kaugalingon, maunay gusto sa Ginoo may tabo sa atong kinabuhi. We have to be humble before Him. Di ta magsigig pinagarpar sa unsay atong kahimtang karon nga angay nato untang ipanghambog igsoon. No. Kay kining tanan ini kalibutan na puro ra gyud ni lumalabay mga pinalangga akong higala. Ug atong nahibalan nga ambot lang ug mutuo pud mo nga gamay na lang kay ang panahon. Kay kana ra bang paglingla sa yawa? Kanang iyahang paglingla nga 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. Maora ba na gina-aplikar karon? Daghang kayong wala nagpangandam sa ilang kaugalingon. Thinking all the while nga taas pa kayo ang lugway sa kapanahonan. Unya di ay peace and safety and sudden destruction will take place. So daghang salamat sa inyong pagpakiguban. Ang Ginoo magpanalangin nato ato ni tapuson sa kapag-ampo. Ginoo, salamat kayo sa imong mensahe sa pulong nganong gitugot ang sala kay balo nami karon ug unsay mga hinungdan ug unsay katuyuan nimo kanamo nga imong mga katawhan. Salamat sa imuhang pagka considerate, mapailubon sa imong higayon o kapanahunan nga imong gihatag kanamo motag-usa ang pagpasiguli sa among kaugalingon diha kanimo. Salamat sa imong pagtubag, salamat nining mga kaigsuonan nga gasalmot sa programa. Amo ning madawat ang tanan sa ngalan ug gahom ni Ginoong Hesus nga among personal manluluwas. Amen.